Welcome. This webinar is going to be talking about internal family systems and spiritual development. And my name's Everett Considine, and I'll be presenting this class. And just to tell you a little bit about the format, I tend to be very experiential in the things that I do. So we'll be doing a number of meditations during the talk. I'll be doing some guided journeys and some guided exercises. And then I'll also just be talking about internal family systems in general. If you don't know anything about it, I'll be giving you a brief overview of it. And I'll be talking a lot about how it's impacted me personally, just in my own life and on my own spiritual journey. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name's Everett Considine, and I live up in the Seattle area, the sometimes sunny, but most of the time rainy Seattle area. And a little bit about my journey. I'm a long-time spiritual practitioner. I met a spiritual teacher when I was 18 and got involved in pretty intensive spiritual practice for 15 years, meditated a couple hours a day, really spent a lot of times focusing on enlightenment more from the Eastern perspectives. After that experience ended, I had a lot of experience meditating, and went out and started to find out that just because I could meditate really well didn't mean that my life was really going to work. And so after that, sort of discovered at a certain point that in addition to my spiritual work, I needed to do my emotional work, and I needed to do my psychological work. And once I was kind of clued into that and started doing my psychological work, things started to work out better for me. And that's a little bit of, many of us know the term spiritual bypass. It's kind of the idea that as spiritual practitioners, we can learn different practices and different things that will allow us to bypass psychological work that we need to do. And a lot of times what happens when that is happening is we may find that, we feel really good, some of the time, we have some sort of spiritual practice or profound spiritual belief that is really feeding us and feeding our spirit. But then we also find that our life doesn't work in certain areas, and we may not know why it doesn't work in certain areas. And for me, when I discovered IFS, it was literally the missing piece of the puzzle. It was what I needed to really start to understand why my life wasn't working in certain areas. And then it gave me a way to approach it. So what I'd like to do is I'm an IFS certified practitioner. I've done all the IFS trainings. I function as a coach. I've been working with Jay Early and teaching his IFS peer facilitation classes for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was doing a lot of workshop facilitation. That's kind of where I discovered that I had a knack for being a healer, and done a lot of workshop facilitation for transformational workshops for gay men. And currently have a private practice where I do spiritual mentoring, where I do one-on-one IFS sessions, where I teach classes, I teach workshops, and then I'm going to start doing retreats this year. And the healing work, the spiritual teaching work I'm doing now is really my heart's, is my calling. And it took me a while to be able to shape-shift my life to the point where I could really be focusing on my calling. And IFS also helped me do that. And one of the subjects that is most dear to my heart is actually, I love teaching spiritual practitioners about IFS, because it can integrate with anything, any kind of spiritual path. And for a lot of us, it's the missing piece of the puzzle, like I said. So what I like to do is actually take a few minutes and do a guided meditation. If you're able to watch this webinar and really allow yourself to just sink in and really be here kind of notice the distracting parts that may want to have you doing other things, and really bring your attention to the content. That's the intention of the way this is being presented, and you'll definitely get the most out of it. So I'm going to put on a little music while I do this guided meditation. And there's a place in the chat box where you can also type in questions. And please feel free to do that. I will every once in a while refer over to them and answer your questions. But this meditation is called 3-point focus, and it's about 10 minutes long. So go ahead and just take a breath. Close your eyes if you're able. And just notice your thinking. Just notice what's on your mind without any need to change it or judge it. Notice your feelings, your emotions. And notice your physical sensations. And feel the top of your head. Feel the muscles in your face. Relax your face. Feel the back of your head and your neck and your shoulders and your chest, your upper back, your lower back, your belly, feel your upper arms, your elbows, your forearms, your wrists and your hands. Feel your hips and your pelvis, your thighs, your knees, your calves, your ankles and your feet. Now imagine a fire burning in your belly, and it's burning hot. And take 3 long, slow, deep breaths. And with each breath, just imagine the heat from that fire getting hotter. And hotter. And hotter. And hotter. Now imagine that all the heat from that fire is transforming into a sense of power and strength that's radiating out from your core. And take 3 long, slow, deep breaths. And with each breath, just sense that power and strength getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. Now imagine a beautiful flower made out of light in the center of your chest. Its petals are slowly opening. And take 3 long, slow, deep breaths. And with each breath, just imagine the beauty of that flower getting brighter. And brighter. And brighter. and brighter. Now imagine all the beauty of that flower is transforming into a sense of love and compassion that's radiating out from your heart. And take 3 long, slow, deep breaths, and with each breath, just sense that love and compassion getting stronger. And stronger. And stronger. And stronger. Now imagine a bright light like a star burning in the center of your forehead. And take 3 long, slow, deep breaths. And with each breath, just imagine the light from that star getting brighter. And brighter. And brighter. And brighter. Now imagine that all the light from that star is transforming into a sense of wisdom and clarity that's radiating out from your mind. And take 3 long, slow, deep breaths. And with each breath, just sense that wisdom and clarity getting stronger. And stronger. And stronger. And stronger. Now sense the power and strength in your core. Sense the love and compassion in your heart. And sense the wisdom and clarity in your mind. And for a moment, just be present to all these attributes of your authentic self. And notice how they can all be present at the same time. Now I want you to notice how you feel in this moment. And then notice if there's some more calmness. If you feel relaxed. Some of the nagging chattering of the day is faded away. And something that's central to the IFS, and you can open your eyes in your own time. If your eyes were closed, that's the meditation's done. Something central to the IFS model of the psyche is something we call self. Capital S, self. And Dr. Richard Schwartz, who developed the IFS model of the psyche about 30 years ago now, actually, really developed it through observation. He was a family systems therapist who was working with bulimic patients, and they started to talk about the different parts of themselves. And that's a population that has a lot of extreme what we call polarizations, parts that are opposite each other, binging and purging. And so he got very curious, and he started to explore their inner worlds with them. And as he worked with them to get to know these different parts of themselves, he started to learn some very key things that have become a part of IFS. He learned that he could help someone unblend from a part. They could have a certain feeling that was very strong, and he could ask them to ask that part to step aside, and it would. And he found that he could even work with someone and ask them to ask a part to step aside, and then it does, and then ask another part to step aside, and it does, and kind of layers of the psyche. But eventually, he always got to a point where someone would say, well, this feels like me. This feels like me. This doesn't feel like a part. And what he discovered, through this kind of observational process was that, everyone has self. We call it capital S self. We call it, authentic self. And those of us who are spiritually oriented, we have different words for that: spirit, soul. There's usually some sense that there's something that we're connected with that's much bigger than the personality. And one of the beautiful things about the way we work with self in IFS is we just notice when the qualities of self are present. Let me turn this music off here. And there's we call it the 8 C's of self. And it's when you feel calmness, curiosity, clarity, compassion, confidence, creativity, courage, connectedness. When any of those are present, we say that we're in self. And those of us that are spiritual practitioners know that, when we meditate, most of the time, we tap into that. That's actually why we meditate. Or maybe we have a practice of prayer, or we walk in the woods and just feel, one with nature or one with God, that there's an essential experience as a spiritual practitioner that we're very familiar with, and that many times we're looking to cultivate. We're looking to deepen that experience. We're looking to have that experience take up more and more of our life. And so in the IFS model of the psyche, there's something very central we call self. And one of the first things that's very useful about the IFS model of the psyche is that you can start noticing when you're in self and when you're not. That's one of the first things you start to do once you start to kind of take on this view of your inner world. Am I in self right now? One of the things I do as a spiritual teacher is I'm always trying to inspire people to cultivate more self. And the thing that's so wonderful is there's so many spiritual paths. There's so many things that we can do that will cultivate self. And even if you aren't particularly spiritual, you could be an atheist, but you still can relate to calmness, confidence, courageousness, these qualities. So, and this concept of self is something that makes IFS seem kind of like a spiritual approach to therapy. Spiritual therapy is because there is this thing called self that's who you are, your authentic self. And one of the reasons I also enjoy, I work with a lot of spiritual practitioners in my one-on-one work, is many times they have actually cultivated a lot of self. And so when you're starting to learn to work with your parts, which I'll be talking more about in a few minutes, the ideal place to work with your parts is actually from self. Take a look at our chat window here. Thank you for letting me know that it's here. Oh, and they're so great. Boy, I wish I could hear you all and that we were sitting in the same room. But I guess we kind of are. You get to see me. This is kind of new for me working like this. But I can sense you. In my mind's eye, we're all sitting in a circle and having this conversation. So this concept of self is very central. And one of the first really useful things you can do in terms of bringing IFS kind of in as part of your spiritual practice is you can start to notice when you're in self. And I've had so many people take my classes, and it stays with you forever, that language of like noticing when you're in self. And you know, kind of the goal, I was thinking, what does it mean to be spiritual, right? Especially when you're talking to, you know, potentially anyone watching this webinar could have any of a number of spiritual paths. But I think some of the things that we would agree on are having a depth of compassion, both for ourselves and others, having access to inner peace, and kind of an embodied inner peace. You're not a kind of spaced out, like not in touch with life kind of experience, but something that's very embodied. And, you know, there's some, I studied with an Eastern kind of meditation teacher for a lot of years and was steeped in all the various types of Eastern pathways to enlightenment. And then when the last 10 years or so, in addition to now studying the psychological, I worked with Gangaji for a while. She sort of shifted my orientation from enlightenment is out there to enlightenment is here. Eckhart Tolle, the present moment, Adyashanti, a lot of really beautiful kind of neo non-dual awareness-based teachings out there right now. So I really feel like we're in an amazing time where there's a lot of teachings that are really suitable now for our culture, and a lot of people are waking up. A lot of people are discovering their own true nature, or, there's so many ways to describe it, right? Each spiritual path would kind of have a different way of describing things. But IFS gives us a language that we can kind of use across all of them. And So if in that meditation you were able to get into a place of calm, then you're in self. We would say in IFS that you're in self. And one of the things that's kind of useful is another concept that's very central to IFS is something called blending. I describe blending as, we all know the feeling of when we get angry, right? We get angry and suddenly, we'd say in IFS that you're blended with your angry part, or maybe even flooded with it, right? And so you are that part, and you're fuming, and the anger's there. And then you might decide, like, okay, I need to calm down, right? So you take a few breaths, maybe you leave the room, maybe you go walk around the block, and after a few minutes, the anger starts to dissipate. It starts to go down. And now you may notice that part of you is still angry, right? And you may even get to the point where you can sense that you're still angry, but now you're not embodying it. It's kind of off to the side. And that's really what blending is, and unblending. And one of the skills that we learn in IFS is how to unblend from parts. One of the ways we do that is by actually starting to do what we call building a relationship with it. You might notice that, wow, I have an angry part, and boy, this part seems to come up a lot. So you could actually do an IFS session where you sat down and got to know your angry part, not just from an analytical, intellectual place, but actually got to know it experientially. And then as you build a relationship with that angry part, well, now it changes. Now, whenever that part gets triggered, you've got a relationship with it suddenly. Suddenly, you can even dialogue with it. So something that was perhaps unconscious before now is starting to become conscious. So one of the key concepts is in IFS that is very appropriate for us spiritual types is the idea of blending and unblending from parts. And once you kind of learn, there's kind of a process you learn when you learn IFS, where you'll learn how to be able to build. And I'm going to actually take you through some guided meditations that are designed to allow you to actually experientially get in and get to know some of what I call our spiritual parts, or parts that can interfere in our spirituality. But let's come back to the IFS model of the psyche for a few minutes. So central to it was this concept of self, right? And then the other thing he discovered was that we have wounds. This is no news to us, right? We have wounded parts. And a wound, in IFS, our wounds are called exiles. So if you hear me talk about an exile, I'm talking about a wounded part. And our wounds are actually created from any kind of unprocessed trauma. I mean, you could, as a child, you could have a traumatic experience. And if there was like a compassionate adult with you there who could like talk you through it, help you understand what happened, you might not get wounded from it. But for nearly all of us, and nearly all the times that we were wounded, that compassionate adult wasn't there. And so what happens in those moments is actual parts are created. Wounded parts are created in the psyche. And that wounded part, kind of the way Dick Schwartz describes our exiles, he says, is they're frozen in scenes from the past. When we have one of those traumatic experiences, that part is created and that scene is kind of frozen there. And that's why later in life, when something is similar to that comes up, it can trigger it and bring up that wound. Now a wound isn't the only thing that's created in that moment. What is also created are protective parts that get built up around the wound. And there's two kinds of protective parts. There's, we call them, there's managers, which are proactive protective parts. So an example I like to use is, let's say there's a guy who has a wound from his father that he's inferior in some way, right? So he has an exile that feels deficient. That's a pretty common wound. Most of us have an exile that feels deficient. And so in order to deal with that exile that feels deficient, he may, another kind of part might be created that would be a taskmaster or a pusher, a part of him that is going to work so hard in his life that he will never feel deficient. So he may have a part of him that, goes to law school and works 70 hours a day and buys an expensive car, an expensive house. And that part is a manager. It's got a proactive strategy to keep him from ever feeling that wound. So our managers are protective parts. Now, that whatever formed that deficiency probably in his childhood, once that protector's formed, well, that manager is now running a big part of his life, maybe his whole life. Now, let's say he goes home for Thanksgiving and sees his father, and his father says something, and it triggers that sense of deficiency. Well, there's another kind of protector that we call a firefighter that's reactive. So it's a protector that tries to put out the fire, so to say, or numb out the pain or distract from the pain. So he goes home, sees his father for Thanksgiving. His father says something, and suddenly he feels deficient, and then he wants to go have a drink, or eat a chocolate cake, or, do any number of things that would help distract him from the pain. And so the IFS model of the psyche is very simple. We say that we have self, we have core self, our authentic self. And we say everyone has self. Even people that might have parts that are in really extreme roles still have self. If you were to get them unblended from all their parts and connected with their core, they have self. And we have wounds. We have exiles. We have lots of different wounds. And then built up on top of our wounds are our managers, right? Which are those proactive parts. Some other kinds of managers might be perfectionism, pleasing, all these different kinds of strategies that evolve to protect us, and ultimately protect a wound or an exile. And then we have our firefighters, which are typically our addictions, our distractions. So, and that is the IFS model of the psyche. It's very simple. It's very simple, but it's very profound in that you can kind of look at anything going on in your life through this lens and really get a much more in-depth understanding of what's happening. Now, when Richard Schwartz was developing IFS, he was a family systems therapist. So he was a systems thinker. And once he started to see this model of the psyche and how these parts, we all have these different parts inside of ourselves, he wondered, whether they were all relating together in a system like family systems. And through more discovery, he found out, yes, they are. That not only do we have a lot of different parts inside of us, but they're all relating together in systems. We have protectors that are layered on top of exiles. We have protectors that are layered on top of protectors. We have protectors that are fighting protectors. There's like a whole world on a systemic level going on inside the psyche. Now, the other thing he discovered is that all our parts are trying to help in some way. So even our most parts that are in the most extreme roles that might be wreaking havoc in our life, when you get in there and you get to know them, you actually find out that they are trying to help. Everything's trying to help. It's a very non-pathologizing view of the psyche. We really, through the IFS lens, we don't see that anyone is broken. What we see is that everyone is a very complex system of parts. The psyche is a very complex system of parts. So that's something else that's very useful from a spiritual perspective, is to know that there's really nothing bad in there. That every different part of our psyche is trying to help. Now, some of those strategies were evolved when we were 3 years old, and we're still using them. Yeah, no wonder they're not working. So everything is trying to help. Now, the other thing that even just being able to start to look through the lens of the IFS model of the psyche totally creates compassion. It totally creates compassion, because what you start to see, and this happens. So if you were to start, working with an IFS practitioner like myself, or an IFS therapist, or start to really dive into IFS or take some classes, it takes maybe 6 months or a year for your kind of view of the world really to shift to this. But when it does, suddenly, instead of seeing someone in the grocery store that looks like they're, giving you the evil eye, or, you can say hi to someone and they don't say hi back. Like what you start to see is you start to see people's protectors. You start to see that, like, wow, people's protective systems are up. Something that you used to take personally, you won't take personally anymore. And you start to know that when that protector is up, there's actually a wound behind it. There's some sort of hurt. And so this view of the human animal really generates compassion. It really, you hear phrases like hurt people, right? In IFS, we start to understand, like, in a very specific way, why that is and what's going on. So one of the things that, this deeper understanding of the IFS model of the psyche does is it really starts to generate compassion. And what I've noticed in my clients is it's something around 6 months to a year when the model really becomes alive for you. Until then, it's still like a mental overlay, and you still have your other way that you're working with things. But it's really beautiful, the depth of compassion that starts to open up just in being able to understand on a more nuanced level kind of how people work. So parts, right? So you'll hear me talk a lot about parts, and we talk about parts in IFS, and parts start to have a specific meaning. And one of the things that, when I was talking a few minutes ago about like what the goal of spirituality is, or being on a spiritual path, right? Most people would agree that it's about having a deeper, more inner peace, a deeper place of compassion, about being able to tap more into the stillness, being able to tap into the transcendent, right? And these are experiences that typically happen when the surface mind, has become still. And so one of the things that happens on our spiritual paths is we can start to get parts. One way I used to look at it before kind of this parts model was that, you might have a new spiritual learning, right? And in that learning, something opens up for you. There's a new level of peace or a new level of connection. And then after a while, the mind comes in and kind of co-opts it. So now suddenly it's some new thing that you learn, and maybe you start to feel superior to other people who don't know it yet, right? And this happens over and over and over on the spiritual path. We find something that is alive and open to us, and then after a while, parts start to come in and form around it. And with IFS, it's very easy to see when that's happening. And it's very easy to work with it, and without this more nuanced model of the psyche, it can be very hard to track that stuff unless you have a teacher who sees it and points it out. I mean, that really is the only other option. But when you're able to start really seeing your own psyche in this way, and to start noticing when you're not in self, you start to notice these subtle parts, spiritual parts. So one of the things I wanted to do was, hold on, let me see if any questions have come in over here. Okay, we're good. So we're gonna go in and do a little process that's going to be allowed about you connecting with a part of you that I call it the spiritual judge. It's a manager, right? So it's a proactive protector. And so go ahead and close your eyes, take a breath. And I want you to think for a moment about how do you judge yourself for not doing what you should be doing spiritually? Whatever that is. Like maybe you think you should be meditating every day and you're not. Or maybe you think you should never get angry and you do. I just want you to notice how do you judge yourself? And also notice, how do you judge other people? Maybe you think everyone should be vegetarian and they're not. And I want you to just notice that there's a part that judges. A lot of the time it's judging us. And just zoom in on some of those statements. What are those things that this part says to you? And then notice that, a lot of times there's the judgment, and then there's actually kind of a harsh. Many times there's a harsh description of us for not living up to whatever that ideal is. And just notice, what are some of the names that you call yourself? This part calls you. And I want you to notice, this is your spiritual judge. This is that part that, when we learned this new way of living that was better, right? This part is trying to hold us to that. And it's a really important, it's important that at one point it was really important that we do those things. They made us feel so much better. And I want you to just connect now with this part, kind of through this memory of how it talks to you. And I want you to notice, if you're able, not everyone feels parts in their body, but just notice when you're blended with this part, if this part's present, do you feel something in your body as a sensation? And just notice what that is, what that sensation is, and where it is. And then I want you to see if you can allow an image to form of this part. Like, what does your spiritual judge look like? In IFS, we personify our parts. It really helps to unblend from them, to form an image. And not everyone will see an image. You might just have a felt sense. But just notice. And it's okay to create an image if an image isn't coming to you. Just use your imagination to create an image. And then notice, how do you feel towards that part in this moment? Are you open? Are you curious about it? Do you not like it? Are you judging it? And what we try and do when we're relating to a part, we try and be in self. So we try to be in that calm, curious, compassionate place. And you might notice when that image comes up that you really aren't feeling compassion towards it. You're really not feeling curiosity. And so just notice, what is it that you are feeling? Maybe you don't like it. Maybe you want to get rid of it. And if a negative feeling is coming up, just ask that feeling if it would just step aside and allow you into a more deeper, more curious and compassionate place. Because I have to say, for those of us on the spiritual path, our spiritual judge is a really important protector. It's that part of us that really wants us to be the best that we can be. So I just want you to notice again, how do you feel towards the spiritual judge in this moment? And hopefully you're feeling more open and curious. And I want you to ask that part, what's its role? Like, how is it trying to help you? And the part may talk to you. You may just know. There may just be a knowing. Again, if you haven't done much parts work yet, then you're still in a discovery of how your parts show up to you. How is this part trying to help you? And ask it, what is it judge as good? What is it judge as bad? ask the protector, ask the judge, what is it afraid would happen if it didn't do this role? And that really shows you the motivation. Shows you the motivation. And if the spiritual judge is very strong in your life, then you'll probably notice that the motivation is very strong. And if you're able, I want you to see if you can send this part some loving attention from your heart. Letting it know that you appreciate that it's trying to help, that it's trying to protect you in this way. And just notice how the part responds. And ask the judge if you have a judge that's particularly harsh when you're not living up to its standards, ask the judge if it would stop being so harsh. Maybe it's shaming you. A spiritual judge is a type of inner critic that all the spiritual types pretty much universally have. And ask the spiritual judge if it would show you, just in a very sort of distant way, if it would show you the exile that it's protecting. And then thank this spiritual judge for coming forward in this way so that you could get to know it more. And so this is one of the ways that we build a relationship with a part. Go ahead and open your eyes if your eyes were closed. Feel free to, if you're taking notes, to take some notes about that. If there were any particular insights that came from that were useful for you. And most of us don't want to judge others. In fact, a lot of the spiritual pathways talk about not judging others. And so this can give you a new kind of access, right, to noticing when a part of you is doing that. Now, the way, if you and I were doing an IFS session personally, and we were working with this part, then we would have taken the next step to find out what the exile was that this part is protecting. And then there's a whole process of going in and getting to know that exile and healing and transforming that exile. And then when that exile is healed and transformed, well, then its protectors themselves can change roles. There's different layers in IFS to what we're able to accomplish. And I think the first one is just getting an understanding, a basic understanding of the IFS model of the psyche itself, just intellectually, analytically, can shift something significantly. To suddenly, most of our lives have been mysteries, like why people do what they do, right? And why do people do the bad things that they do? Why do they do the good things? And one of the things that the IFS model of the psyche is, it really explains that, like in a very detailed, nuanced way. Like you can go inside your own psyche and understand in a very detailed way why you do the things that you do. All the way from the originating trauma and then the protective system that's built up around it. Now, so understanding IFS also can allow us to be more compassionate for ourselves and others, right? But the process I just took you through with your spiritual judge is the process of what I call building a relationship with the part. And as we build relationships with protectors, we start to have more choice. Now, if you've built enough of a relationship with your spiritual judge, and if you're someone has built up a high level of self-awareness, maybe through your spiritual practice, you can start noticing that part now when it's present. You may even be able to notice it and not act from it. And so that's the value. You may be able to unblend from it. And most of the problems that we have in our life are protectors that are in extreme roles. Some protector that's in an extreme role. So understanding the IFS model of the psyche can bring a lot of benefit. Starting to build relationships with protectors. Now, sometimes IFS is really good for dealing with trauma. And one of the reasons is that we're very respective of the protective system. Well, first of all, we acknowledge that there is a protective system. There are other kind of healing models where all they call the protective system is resistance. They're just trying to get right in there to the wounds. And in IFS, we spend a lot of time building relationships from the protective system and getting permission from the protective system before we even actually work with the wounds. And who was it? Someone who came to one of my classes. Oh, he came to the class. He said because a friend of his was doing IFS, and she said that IFS, she's been doing therapy for years, but IFS is the thing that's helped her more than anything else. And you hear that over and over and over. And it's because IFS is very laser-like. and it's very experiential. So it really, in a presentation like this, we're thinking, right? But IFS sessions themselves are very experiential. Typically you go in, there's something you want to work on. There's something you want to transform in your life that's probably a problem. And so when you go into the session, there might be a little bit of discussion where we kind of discuss what it is you want to work on. And I'm very good at sort of spotting parts now. So we can sort of talk about something and I can help you start to see what the parts are that are there. And then a lot of times I'll see that a lot of times there's one part in particular that if you focus on that, it's kind of like the key stone under the pyramid. If you focus on that one part, then the whole system's going to change. And so what we do is we go in and look at the issue, and then we discuss all the different parts that are coming up around it. And then we choose a part as our target part, and we start to work with that part. We start to build a relationship with that part. And the whole time you're now making something that was unconscious before, right? You're now making it conscious. And you're also making it conscious in this very loving way. You know that all the things that are going on there are trying to help, like even though they might be wreaking havoc, right? So we'll then explore what's going on from a parts perspective. So you start to learn what all the parts are, and then you start to build relationships with those parts. And depending whether your protective system is ready or not, you might even be able to, in one session, go from the protective system into start working with exiles and transforming exiles. So the layer of and if you just built relationships with all your protectors and did not do any exile work for like a year or two, you would get a huge amount of benefit out of that. Because again, you're starting to lovingly notice when parts of yourself are activated. And then you're starting to have choice. You're starting to be able to unblend. Now, so that's great. You can get a lot of benefit out of that. Now, the real deep transformation happens when we start to go under the surface now of the protective system, and we start to work with our wounded parts. And we start to heal and transform our wounded parts. When we heal and transform in exile, and there's very specific techniques that we use in IFS to do that, all the protectors that have built up around that wound can change roles. I mean, you can have really dramatic, sudden transformation in your life. I have one client. She's amazing. She's a resident, just about to become a doctor. And every time we do an IFS session around some particular thing that's going on with her, it completely changes for her. Not everyone is like that. Some people need to revisit things, but I can say, at least in one case, it's consistent every single time we do a session on something. That issue completely transforms for her. And again, it's the power of this model. And people that are using it will tell you this. They will tell you it's the most effective thing that they've used. So the deeper layer is working with exiles and transforming exiles. And most of the time you need to work with a facilitator to do that. There's a lot of building relationships with your protectors that you can do on your own. And one of the things I'm evolving that I'll be announcing soon is actually a class where I'm going to be taking key IFS key things that we do at the IFS, and I'll be teaching them as a spiritual practice. So it'll be an actual kind of meditation you can do that will help you do that particular thing. And because those of us who are practitioners, we're kind of wired to do that. We don't have any issues sitting down for a while and doing a process. In fact, we can either add it to the beginning or end of maybe a daily practice that we already have. So the deeper transformation happens when we heal exiles. And I wanted to, so I'm going to jump around a little bit here. Let me see how I'm doing on time. Good. So I talked about spiritual parts, right, that evolve through a spiritual practice. And some of these I've run into in clients, some of them I've run into in myself, and then some I guess I have run into all these. So your spiritual judge, right? That's a manager. That it's very common. We all get that one. And boy, when someone is really blended with, when you're with someone who's really blended with that part, it's so annoying, right? And and we see it particularly in some of the Western approaches to spirituality that are heavily judgmental, right? Even though at the core they're not supposed to judge, but they judge. Something else that evolves, and I've worked with a couple of people with this, is something that I call your spiritual cynic. And that happens, and it's usually someone that's a little bit older, and it's where you've been through spiritual group after spiritual group, or you've learned this thing after this thing after this thing, and you've become disillusioned with them all. Or maybe you always are noticing that the spiritual leader is, somehow corrupt or is not integrous. And so you become cynical, and it can really, really cast it. It can really close you down from being able to really be present and open and compassionate and feel wonderful. But I've worked with a few people that had that particular manager. And so it was very important to get them to unblend from that so that they could have like a fresh experience of the work that we're doing. Sometimes people evolve a positive reframer, right? It's just a part of you that reframes everything to the positive. Reframes everything to the positive. Reframes everything to the positives. And there are some spiritual teachings that have gotten popular that really dissuade people from having any sort of negative thinking. And so you can get a part that just reframes everything to the positive. And one of the things, sometimes someone may feel like they're very spiritual and they're very awake and they're really in touch with these amazingly deep places, but they can't hold a job or they can't be in a relationship. Like parts of their life don't work. And parts like this, sometimes we can evolve spiritual parts that don't allow us to see that there's something wrong. Something needs to change. And so one of those is what I call a positive reframer. And again, the nice thing with this model is you can just notice, it's like, oh, I have that part, right? So now you can start to build relationship with it. You can start to get to know it. You can start to unblend from it. You can find out if there's some sort of wound that's driving that, right? Sometimes we evolve what I'm calling the spacey part, right? We kind of all know or have known or been that spiritual person that's just really spaced out. And some meditation practices, if done in certain ways, can really space you out. And one of the things that I found, and when I came to IFS, I definitely had some some parts I'd created in meditation that were very dissociative. And I was really able to start to see those parts as parts and to do healing work around them, so that in my meditation, I could be embodied versus dissociated. And that was something that was, again, something else that IFS allowed me to see that I don't know how else I would have done that. But that was one of the benefits. So, dissociative, sometimes, meditation practice. Now, I have to admit that I'm very grateful for my dissociative parts from meditation, because when I need them, like, I don't have to drink a bottle of Jack Daniels. I can just space out, and I can space out into bliss. I mean, when I space out, it feels really good. And so again, non-pathologizing is there's nothing wrong with those parts. They're protectors, and you may have moments in your life when you need that protection, and you won't have to go to a substance, because you have this ability to just feel great. But again, our ideal, right, is to be deepening in our connection to spirit and to be embodied, to be more and more present, or if we are leaving our body for whatever, because we enjoy that and we're able to do it, we're able to know that's happening and then, come back to our body, be embodied again. A part that I think is fun to work with if you have issues around having a daily meditation practice is what I call the pusher. It's a part that's focused on that next thing that you have to do. Next thing that you have to do. And so it doesn't let you sit down and meditate, because you have to go do this thing. You have to go do this. Now I have to go do this. And so you in IFS, you can start to build a relationship with that part, get to know that part, and then start to have some choice. And if you can unblend from that part, then it's easier to sit down and have been practice. Oh, and then another part that's very important to get to know is we call it your analytical part. And your analytical part really keeps you from being present, right? Because our analytical part analyzes everything. And even when you're doing work that's designed for you to be present, for it to be experiential, as we do, that's one of the things I track when I'm doing sessions with people and if you're doing IFS, about this, or as you start to do IFS, you'll start to get to know your analytical part. And you'll start to notice when you're thinking about your parts versus when you're actually experientially connecting with your parts. And there's a lot, by building relationship with your analytical part, you can notice when you're up in your mind. And the mind is a beautiful thing, and some of our analytical parts are brilliant, genius Einsteins. I mean, they really are amazing. But a lot of times they're protectors that are keeping us from feeling emotion, keeping us from feeling our feelings, right? But what you can do in IFS is you could actually work with your analytical part and understand what it's protecting. If you're someone that tends to be very cerebral, then you can build relationship with it and then start to drop into your feelings. And then I call self-like parts, the part of me that thinks I'm enlightened. Whatever that means. That part wants to be enlightened. You can notice those things as parts. And you can pat it on the head and you can say, yes, dear, you're enlightened, you're awake, And then you can bring your awareness back to the present moment. Or, more importantly, you could work with that part, and if it's a protector, understand what it's protecting. I'm very convinced that most of us that want to be enlightened really have an exile that feels very unenlightened. And so even that desire to go do that is a protector that's protecting the sense of deficiency. And I know that was the case in my case. So, but these are some spiritual. So when you're exploring yourself from a spiritual perspective, it's really rich. And if you're someone, again, this is why I love working with spiritual practitioner is, we are very self-aware. We are interested in our inner worlds. And what IFS does is it gives you a very nuanced map of your inner world. So I want to invite, if anyone has any questions, to go ahead and type them in, and I will answer them. Oh, also, I'm going to put up a poll. And if anyone wants to answer that poll, wait, start poll. Okay, so now I'm a little new to the system, so bear with me. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do another process. And I've got an offer too. One of the things I'm doing is in these webinars is my one-on-one sessions are normally $135, but I'm doing a special for new clients where I'll do 3 sessions with you for $100 each for $300. And 3 sessions really can give you a good feel for IFS and the value you can get out of it. So I popped that up if you want to take advantage of that. So we worked with a manager, right, or spiritual judge. And so let's work with a firefighter now. Now, our firefighters, right, are reactive protectors. And those are the parts that a lot of times there are addictions. They're trying to distract us from pain. And so I want you to just think for a moment about, like, what are one of your addictions? Maybe it's overeating. Maybe it's an actual substance. Maybe it's the internet. Maybe it's television. Like what are one of your addictions? Now, what I want you to now think back to a moment when that addiction was present, when that desire for whatever that was present. We call that a trailhead in IFS. And I want you to notice, right, when that part is present, if you feel it in your body somewhere. Where do you feel it in your body? And now I want you to see if you can allow an image to form of this part. Like if you were to personify this part as an image, what would it look like? And I want you to notice, how do you feel towards it? More than likely, you probably don't like it. And I want you to notice that there is another part that not only doesn't like this part, but probably tries to control it. And I want you to now bring your attention to the part that tries to control the addiction. And I want you to notice, how does that part feel about the addiction? And I want you to see now, typically the part that's trying to control the firefighter is a manager. And I want you to allow an image to form of that manager, of the part that's trying to control the addiction. Like, what does that part look like? And how do you feel towards that part? How do you feel towards the part that's trying to control the addiction? Do you like that part? Do you not like that part? Are you open? Are you curious? And I want you now to place to one side of you, I want you to place the addictive part, and then to the other side, place the controlling, the part that's trying to control it, and just notice which part is on which side. And I want you to now visualize both of those parts in front of you, and see if you can also visualize the relationship that they have. Like, how do they interact? And then I want you to notice you yourself in your body as separate from both of these parts. And I want to see if you can find a place of compassion towards both of these parts. And I want you to ask the addictive part, what is its role? How is it trying to help you? And also ask it, what is it afraid will happen if it doesn't do this role? Again, noticing that that's the motivation. That's what it's afraid will happen. And then I want you to ask the manager, the controlling part, what is its role? How is it trying to help you? And ask that manager, the controller, what is it afraid will happen if it doesn't do its role? And now I want you to take both of these parts and I want you to move them very far away from you in your mind. Move them both very far away from you. And again, I want you to notice yourself and your body as separate from them both. And if you're able, send some loving attention to both these parts because they're both protectors. They're trying to help. And then take a breath. Just open your eyes. And if you want to take some notes, if there was anything that came from that you want to remember. Another kind of interesting topic is, so IFS is a form of therapy that's been around for 30 years, and it's really amazing. It really can work with almost any type of issue. And a little bit of what my history with IFS was I had been working with this gay men's retreat. So to make a very long story short, kind of when I left, I was involved in a really hardcore spiritual practice through most of my 20s and early 30s. And I was very kind of celibate, like really not focused on relationship or sexuality. And towards the end of that period, I really started to want to be in a relationship. And so I left that group and, sort of continued my process on my own, still reading. I'm very much a geek, like a tech geek. I actually have a computer science background. And I'm kind of a spiritual geek too. I just read everything, absorb everything. And so I still continue to do that. And then I got into what turned it into a very dysfunctional relationship that ended very tragically. And even though I had all these skills I developed as a meditation practitioner, they really weren't helping me when it came to the real world. And then at the end of that relationship, where my partner ended up getting addicted to crystal meth, he ended up dying from it. And after that whole thing happened, I was sort of thrown into doing my emotional work, and it really, I mean, the blessing, so to say, of all that was that it was the thing that got me focused on the fact that, I need to do my emotional work. I've got all this spiritual, I can sit down and meditate and have all these amazing experiences and yada, yada, yada. But, I can't, my emotional world has not been addressed. And I ended up finding a group of gay men who were doing these transformational retreats. And it was much more focused on the emotional side, but it also had a spiritual component. And so I got involved in those. And in that work, I started to realize, because of my years of meditation, and just this kind of presence I have, that I really can hold space for people in healing sessions. And the kinds of spiritual experiences that would happen for me when I was actually doing session work were really profound. So it was really kind of life or God pointing to me that, I need to be doing this kind of work. And so I got involved with that group, and I learned how to be a facilitator and took all their training. And once I'd moved up here to Seattle, I met a woman who was an IFS therapist, and she started to tell me about IFS and what she did. And it sounded so similar to what we were doing in these retreats. We were using voice dialogue as kind of a parts model, but we were also very focused on the present moment and present-centered awareness, which is kind of like self in IFS. So I got online to find it, because I jump into things to learn IFS, and found out that a year-long training was starting in 2 weeks here in Seattle. And this was about 8 years ago. 7 to 8 years ago. And so I signed up for it, jumped in, and then as I jumped into learning IFS and learning to be a practitioner, I found I had a real skill for this, and that my spiritual background really helped, actually, because I can hold that space of self, which is so important when you're doing session work. And so why am I telling you this? So I'm just telling you about how my IFS evolved for me. So I jumped into this year-long training, and and then realized, this is something that I'm feeling really drawn. At the same time, I was also had started a shamanic training here, a 3-year shamanic program, and IFS, the healing part of IFS when we work with exiles is very similar to shamanic soul retrieval. If you know anything about it, it's like another form of soul retrieval, but it's done in this very psychological way. So it's very interesting. So I was building up, I was learning shamanic soul retrieval at the same time I was learning IFS. And then I totally jumped into IFS. I took all the trainings, levels 1, 2, and 3. I started TAing the different things. The other thing that's interesting is IFS is a systemic model, right? So that means we see the psyche as a system of parts. And one of my areas of background is I'm a systems analyst. So my mind works in systems. Like, it's very easy for me to see and understand a whole system. So that was the other thing that was playing into my interest in IFS. Was it was spiritual, it was psychological, and it's systems oriented. So all those things mixed together were all things I had a background in. And then when I was in the IFS training, I've taught meditation for years, and during the IFS training, I was thinking, you know what, I could teach this like a spiritual practice. I mean, there's so much in this that you could do as a practice. And so after I went through the training, I started to do that. I started to do a weekly, I call it inner parts work in meditation, where I get together, we do meditation, and then I do guided journeys for people. I do sessions in front of people. And it was true. You could actually teach IFS as a spiritual practice. And I had been doing that for a year. And then I had also was working with Jay Early on some of his projects. And Jay had been teaching this IFS peer facilitation class. It's a teleclass. He'd been teaching it for a number of years. And he was kind of wanted to take a break from it because he'd been teaching it so much. He's back teaching it again. So he asked me if I'd like to teach it. So I did. So I started teaching IFS peer facilitation classes. And I've been teaching those teleclasses for about 3 years. And so just in that process of teaching the steps over and over and over, it really has honed my skills as an IFS facilitator to like a really amazing degree. And I just love introducing IFS to people, you know, and like I said, especially love introducing it to spiritual practitioners. Because, you know, I'm not a therapist, so I function as a coach. And the people that are attracted to work with me are typically pretty high functioning spiritual types. And that kind of person can really take IFS and really run with it. You know, people that are more, dealing with things that a therapist might work with, who are really in places of crisis, dealing with really deep issues where they don't have access to a lot of self energy. Those are places where it's harder to introduce IFS to those clients. So I've been really blessed, and the people I work with are really receptive and really able to run with it. And so let me see. I'm kind of feeling like I'm finishing up here on what I wanted to talk with you about. If anyone has any questions, just type them into the chat, and I will answer them. And if not, I'll probably just finish up in the next couple minutes here. Well, yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention was just some of the wounds that we have around spirituality, right? And, again, IFS is about healing. So it can help you heal those wounds. A lot of us have experienced betrayal in different ways. Those of us that have been around the block and been in a lot of different groups. Unfortunately, what happens a lot to spiritual leaders who are not doing their emotional work, get all this weird shadow material. And a lot of times that material comes out in really weird, screwed up ways. And so a lot of us have had that experience of having someone we thought was very enlightened and then find out later that they're screwing the whole flock or taking advantage of people, or a huge variety of things. So there's a lot of, something that happens a lot in the gay community is there's a wounding around religion, where the religion that you were brought up in actually is telling you that there's something wrong with you. And so there can be betrayal from the religion that you were brought up in, betrayal from teachers that you've worked with. And those are those are individual traumas that form exiles, and then we have protectors that build up around them. So I've been blessed to work and help people work through those things, so you can heal that trauma, so you can tap into, what was perhaps good, true, and beautiful in whatever you were doing, and be able to separate out the shadowy stuff. Disillusionment, again, that's usually what happens from betrayal, but there's a variety of ways. That's where that cynic can form, and the thing I know is, if you are in that place where you're kind of, been there, done that, everything's, you're in that place of the cynic, that is a part, and I know that you can work with that, and you can find again the freshness, the excitement that maybe you felt in the past, that all that is still there. What's covering it up are parts. Some of us feel like our best spiritual years were in the past, when we were part of some group, or we were, that was the heyday, and now we're just whatever we are. And that does not have to be. You absolutely, you should feel like I feel like I'm a deeper place now than I've ever been my entire life. Every person should be deepening in their connection to spirit, whatever that means to you. And IFS is a wonderful way to work with all the parts that are keeping that from happening. And initially, it can be, when you first start to go in, it's complex. There's lots of layers, and there's really reasons that those layers are there. But if you're patient and you find the right practitioner, if you're going to do the work yourself, you just have to be patient and keep going, and start to track self. Start to notice when you're in self. Start to prioritize being in self. It's so wonderful. One of the things that IFS can allow, I have some friends that are Christian, and they love the fact that IFS points out the parts in Christianity versus the soul of Christianity. Every religion has its original, what was the original inspiration, the real core, the spiritual core of it. And then there's all these parts that have built up around it that are usually just all from humans, or there are our own parts that build up. And all that stuff can be sorted out with IFS. All that stuff can be sorted out so that you can focus on what's real, like what the real spiritual core is. So if you want to learn more about this, reach out to me. I do a half-hour free informational session. If you're thinking of working with me, I can talk to you. I'm starting to do more classes and workshops. I'm starting to take on this format. This is my first webinar, and I really like it. I think I might have a knack for this. So you'll be seeing more of this type of content from me. And the main thing is I want to inspire you to go deeper, to go deeper, whatever your spiritual path is, and not be, and to know that what's not working are your parts, and that you can work through that stuff. And if you're someone in spiritual leadership, please do your emotional work. Have a therapist, have someone you're working with, because if you don't, you are going to crash and burn. And we see examples of it over and over and over. IFS is a wonderful, wonderful way to be doing your emotional work if you're someone in spiritual leadership. So I want to say goodbye. I'm going to close with another brief meditation, and then we'll go ahead and end on that. So go ahead and close your eyes and take a breath. And I just want you to notice if you're blended with a part in this moment. If you're not in self, if you're not feeling calm, if you're not feeling connected, if you're not feeling compassionate, then you're blended with a part. And I want you to just ask that part if it would just sit to the side of you. And just allow you into a deeper place of stillness. And then I want you to notice again how you're feeling. And if you're not feeling calm and connected, compassionate, then perhaps it's another part. And ask that part if it would just sit to the other side of you. Again, just allowing you into a deeper place. And then bring your awareness to the center of your chest. And bring something to mind that you're grateful for. And place an image of that in front of you. And see if you can just focus on the sense of gratitude itself. And again, I'm visualizing that we're all sitting here in a circle. And I want you to know I'm grateful for you. And I'm grateful for everyone that's showing up to do their own work. And please reach out if I can be of assistance in any way. And I'll also send you an email after this with some other resources that you can access to learn more about IFS. And you can find me on my website at everettconsidine.com. And on that note, I will close the circle. I want to thank everyone for coming.